Welcome to Denby Does Dharma. I am joined by Jane Hardwicke Collings this morning, who, as I just joked with her before starting recording, I've been stalking her for many years. She is the quintessential grandmother, goddess, shamanic healer, orchestrator of amazing work for the divine feminine on this plane. And it's such a privilege to talk with her and to literally pick your brain and your heart and your womb today as well, Jane, with all the information and the wisdom that you can share. So thank you so much for making time for me today.
Thank you, Denby. I'm so honored to be invited into your sacred space here to share what I can.
Beautiful. Thank you, darling. You have so much, as I said, a plethora. You're a walking library of everything to do with women's health and wisdom and healing, and especially in the birthing. For those of you who are watching who don't understand or don't know of your work, you're seriously next level. You've been doing this work for close to 40 years, forever. Basically, this is your calling. You are living your life's purpose and mission. And starting off as a former nurse, a former midwife, and in that the medicalized institution, which serves its purpose when it's needed, of course. And then, of course, through your natural expansive journey of, hopefully you'll get to share some with us, of what's led you down that shamanic path and connecting with the red road and the wisdom of the divine feminine, all the sacred mysteries, the things that you teach now. Can you give us a little bit of a background catch up and how that all came to be?
Sure, yeah, I would never have imagined I'd be doing what I'm doing if wind back my life to 19, 20, 21 when I did my nursing training at Mona Vale Hospital on the Northern Beaches in Sydney.
Just
And
near
I,
me.
yeah, I was one of the last groups of people who went through nursing training before it went into university. So we were like the hard workers. We were scrubbing bedpans in the pan room and everything. And my nursing training, I was going to say I loved it. That's a total lie. I didn't love it at all. It was hard work and 3 very long years. But I feel like it really set me up and prepared me for life. And I think that so much of what I learned in my nursing training would be such useful stuff to teach kids at school, actually. And I yesterday did a first aid refresher program, a course that I keep my first aid up to date, and that too would be a really useful thing for everybody to know. Like we've been encouraged to sort of outsource common sense, which is an unfortunate situation. Anyway, so winding back, I would never have expected that I would end up where I am. But so what I did was my nursing training, and then I worked in a pediatric intensive care unit for a while, which was actually terrifying and full of all kinds of terrible things. And then I worked as an operating theatre sister, is what we called it in those days, or graduate nurse. And I worked in as the one who passes the instruments to the surgeon and working with the anaesthetists and in recovery and stuff. So I had some pretty kind of, high stress, top level sort of postgraduate jobs. And then I went to do midwifery. And I was 25 years old and I wanted to do midwifery, but I wanted to do midwifery because I wanted to have a baby myself. So I wanted to learn everything I could about that process. And actually, as it turned out, I needed to unlearn all of that to actually have a baby myself. But I did my midwifery training at Royal North Shore Hospital, a big tertiary hospital in Sydney, which was representing the state-of-the-art maternity care at the time and probably still says that they do, like all of those institutions. But what happened for me when I did my midwifery training was I had an awakening. And I didn't even know what an awakening was as a 25-year-old. Like I'd grown up in a typical patriarchal household where dad went to work and mum looked after the children, and I don't know if she actually brought him his slippers, but I kind of feel like that was probably what was going on. And so but I didn't even know that there was a patriarchal culture. I was just living the life that I was living. And then, I mean, I did feel that I was less than because I was a girl, but I was just accepting that because that was the way it was. I didn't question it until I did my midwifery training. And when I did my midwifery training, it was like smack in my face, and everybody else's who cared to notice. What I saw there was institutionalized acts of abuse and violence on women and babies masquerading as safety. And it was just a total tragedy. And to be honest, I knew that even in being there, I was complicit and I couldn't get out of there fast enough. And so what I did after my midwifery training was that I found an alternative to that hospital-based care of home birth. And basically, I then was a home birth midwife for 30 years, and I grew up in the home birth world with that, with those people who actually are thinking about what they're doing, as opposed to just showing up because that's the way it happens. And you know, it's for birth, but then how we give birth and the care we receive and the care we seek and the lessons we learn around birth set us up for mothering and then raising our children and everywhere we go from there. So within the home birth world, and I had my own babies, I had 3 children myself, and they were the greatest teachers for me. Actually, my first baby was born, he's now 35, so it's a long time ago, and I learned so much from his birth. I actually learned what set me up for my work, which was what I refer to as the shamanic dimensions of pregnancy, birth, and mothering. So I was a home birth midwife at the time, planning to have a home birth, and then I ended up, after a long time of pushing with no baby coming, I transferred to the hospital and had a in labor. It wasn't an emergency because neither of us were, you know, in trouble, but an in labor caesarian section in the 2nd stage because he wasn't coming. And I found it wasn't actually like a traumatic experience as such, but it was a deeply disappointing experience to me because I really wanted to have a vaginal birth. You know, I wanted my body to do what my body could do. And so in the unpacking of that, like in my personal debrief and talking to my midwife about it, I realized that the feeling I had was actually a familiar feeling to me. And I was then able to just, you know, fast track this story to realize that birth is not some isolated event in your life. It's actually the culmination of your life thus far. How you give birth is like a readout of your mindset, your attitudes, your beliefs, and your fears that you inherit from your previous experiences or your culture or your family, and particularly from your previous rites of passage. So my first birth 35 years ago really got me going into this whole way of seeing birth as a rite of passage in our lives, not some random dangerous medical event. And so I learned so much through my own pregnancies and births. I unpacked that what I didn't do when I had my first birth was that I didn't surrender. You know, like I knew what you had to do to have a baby. I've been saying as a midwife, I've been saying to women, surrender, surrender. But when it came to me,
breathe.
when it came to me doing that, I had no idea where my surrender button was. And, you know, obviously there is no such thing. But what I realized was I had already decided as a child, actually, from some trauma, that it was never going to be safe to surrender. So come the birth process, I didn't surrender. But I didn't know that I had decided that until I debriefed my experience. I mean, had I known what I know now, there were lots of signs that I could have, pieced together to see what the setup was for my birth, because that's the way we work now, is by looking at our previous rites of passage, our own birth, any childhood trauma that we experience, our menarche, our first period, our experience of our menstrual cycle, and how we are with that, and what sort of contraceptives we use, etc. All of those lead to the next rite of passage. So our culture, unfortunately, and it is changing, but way too slow to my mind, is waking up to the fact that we need to get our menarche rituals much better than what people my age and probably your age and younger even experienced. So when we have our first period, our menarche or menarche or menarche or puberty for boys, different story, but I'll just focus on menarche. we are initiated into womanhood. And the way a rite of passage works is that whatever happens or doesn't happen, whatever's said or not said, whatever's going on in the world or your family at that time, teaches the person going through the rite of passage how their culture values the next role they're going into. So at menarche, it's womanhood, and therefore how to behave to be accepted by the culture. And we do whatever we have to do to be accepted by the culture, because humans are herd animals and we need to belong, otherwise our life's under threat. So we do whatever we have to do to belong. And so at our menarche, historically, most of us have been simply initiated into menstrual shame. And that's actually still happening, because menstrual shame is the pandemic that's been going on like for millennia and millennia and millennia. And it has its roots in all the ancient versions of the current dominant religions. And women are seen as impure, and menstruation is dirty, and blah, blah, blah. So we're initiated into menstrual shame, and menstrual shame leads to body shame, and body shame leads to low self-esteem and body dysmorphia and all manner of wounded behaviors like eating disorders and self-harm, and even sadly in teenagers, dangerous and risky sexual decision making. So
and would you also say endometriosis and ovarian cysts and those sorts of things too? That's like planting the seeds for those sorts of imbalances later as well, Jay?
Yeah, ultimately, because how you are initiated into womanhood sets you up for how you will look after yourself or not when you're menstruating. So just like a baby is hardwired to expect that its mother will look after it when it's born, so too is a young woman hardwired to expect that when her periods come, her mother or equivalent will teach her about her body, well, probably before, right? Teach her about her body and the cycle and what to do and how to live that in a healthy way, etc. But that's not what happens. And so she who is initiated into womanhood at the altar of menarche is the woman that shows up at the birth altar to give birth, completely enculturated by how she's supposed to behave to be accepted by her culture as a woman, like be a good girl and hide your period and don't make a fuss and all that kind of stuff. And if we go into the birth experience doubting our bodies, which is what menstrual shame has us believe, you know, our bodies are dirty and unpredictable, and you know, we're mostly taught to hide and pretend we're not menstruating, carry on regardless. Take that attitude to birth and, you know, it's way behind the eight ball. So I learned all of this stuff as a midwife, and have then I made workshops to teach women, and then I've written books, and I created a women's mystery school, a school of shamanic womancraft, and it is my absolute mission to do what I can to help heal the wounded feminine and the wounded masculine of our patriarchal culture. So that's within each of us, you know, men and women. And primarily, my mission is to wake up the witches. And what I mean by that is the wise women. So that's kind of like, in a nutshell, how I got to be where I am now.
Drop the mic. Brilliant. Maybe just to stop the podcast there, because that's pretty much, you've just like, I've got a list of things to ask. It's like tick, 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 tick. Yeah, just put all those in the first 5 minutes. It's brilliantly said, darling, and so appreciative that you are, you know, on the planet here doing this work at this, you know, pivotal time for men and women, of course, because it's all interconnected, as you know. And when you say all that, and from my experiences, you know, being a pre and a postnatal and a fertility shamanic healer and yogi and all those things, and nowhere near in your echelon, but working with that, and to whatever degree I have been, and haven't done it for a while actually. I've focused on older women in the recent years as I've matured as well, because I didn't want to be around the screaming babies anymore. Once my child grew up, I was like, no, I'm done that now. I want to go and focus on the slightly older ones. But it's such a vital time, as you say. It's no wonder that the teenage adolescent phase of humanity has been targeted and, you know, attacked and, you know, fed sugar and, you know, abused, and created all this, you know, confusion between the sexes and genders and all those sorts of things. if you want to distort the feminine and the masculine, that's how you do it. But when you talk about the medical institution and the work that you're doing, the word that just came to me was trust. It's like that area, or that whole industry has deliberately, I think, consciously and unconsciously, intended to remove women's natural sense of trust in their bodies and in their abilities, in their wisdom, and the teachings that we all inherit that's in the cells of our body, most definitely. And when I was pregnant, I got pregnant at 37, which is, apparently the doctors, you're borderline, you're in a dangerous area.
You'd be labelled a geriatric primipara.
Okay, thank you. That was me. And a history of very borderline dangerous births and complicated births. And I had a weird shaped uterus as well. And I just went, the doctor was sitting there ticking all these things saying, be careful, don't do your yoga practice. And I just sat there for a couple of seconds and went, you know what? I have all this knowledge that I've accrued. This is my opportunity now to go through this rite of passage for myself. And I didn't ignore it because I didn't want to be silly or anything. I took that into consideration for the health of my baby, obviously. But I just completely went into this space of trust. And I ended up having a 4-hour labour in the hospital, in the water, with no drugs and no tearing or no nothing. And it was the most miraculous experience of my life. And my doula literally just sat next to me, just like this over the edge of the bath, just going, I don't need to be here. I don't need to be doing anything. I mean, it was lovely to have her, of course, but that was such an empowering change. And I know that when I did that, I was healing a lot of the wounding from my mum and my sister and my ancestors. I've got goosebumps through my whole body now. By going into that space of empowerment and clearing that. So can you speak to your, I'm sure you've had like thousands of experiences like that, not just yours as well. What's the main thing that you see most women coming into the birth process with, the main fear, I suppose?
Yeah, well, like the thing about birth is that you have the birth you have to teach you what you need to learn about yourself to take you to the next place on your journey. And so when we come to one of these transformational rites of passage, and these are called the blood mysteries or the women's mysteries, so it's our own birth, our menarche, every pregnancy, because every pregnancy results in a birth, including miscarriages and abortions. That's the birth. Whatever ends the pregnancy is the birth. And then menopause, and then death. But I can't really talk about death. Haven't had any near-death experiences, so I don't really know. But, a lot of the traditions tell us that everything in life is about preparing for death. So no doubt that's the big one. But what I was going to say about rites of passage is when we go to a rite of passage, we're not just arriving with our own story. We're arriving with, as you said before, your red thread story, your motherline story. So each of us are simply and complexly the current version of whatever the story is that's playing out in our red thread or motherline. And it doesn't mean everybody has the same life, like mums and grandmas but there'll be some sort of a theme. And the dominant ones are like, low self-esteem, depression, addictions, abuse, that kind of stuff. And so what happens when we come to a rite of passage, every rite of passage that I've mentioned is like we become the next version of ourselves. And it's like we come to a fork in the road. And one fork is the same old, business as usual, keep doing the same, maintaining the same wounds and trauma. And the other way is the healing. But in order to change the trajectory, the setup, we need to do the inner work required to deal with whatever it is that we are dealing with and have the opportunity to transmute on behalf of our mother line. Like scientists have proven now that generational trauma is passed down through the DNA. So this, they've legitimized what we already know. So when you get to this fork in the road, it's like such an opportunity to be with all that arises. Like you don't even need to do a forensic archaeological dig of her story. You only need to be with what arises for you. So I think your story kind of highlighted it then, but like in the moment you need to be with what is, which is midwifery 101, be with what is, not what you wish was happening, be with what is. and it will be like the tip of the iceberg that will represent whatever the story is. So at our rites of passage, particularly at our birth, because when we give birth, we're a bit more kind of, I don't know, street savvy and a bit more wise about life compared to our menarche when we're like average age 13, where we're just struggling to even understand what's going on with our body, let alone think what the culture's doing. So when we come to giving birth, there's a little bit more autonomy or obvious kind of doing what they do situation. So I think that the thing that we are encouraged in our culture is what my teacher Janine Pavati Baker used to call the cult of the expert. So we've been brainwashed to believe that it is smarter, wiser, cleverer, etc., to outsource our knowing to the expert. But unfortunately, the experts in medicine are part of a reductionist perspective where there's just like, it's focused on one body system. So like, you know, for example, one of the most impactful things for how we give birth is our psychology, not just our body. So, you know, a more holistic approach is what's required for everything, especially birth and especially menstrual cycle stuff and infertility and journeys through menopause. But we've been encouraged to think that we don't know anything and that the experts know, and we should hand over our trust to them, not trust in our own bodies. So there's a big clue there, and that is that if we initiate our daughters into womanhood in a really empowering way at menarche, they're not going to be led to believe that they have to hide their power and their blood, whatever. They're going to be celebrating it and demand honoring. And by the time they come to give birth, they're not going to roll over when some old guy says or woman says to them, I'm the expert here and I know what to do. They're going to say, excuse me? How could you know? How could you be the expert of my body? I am. I've been menstruating for the last however many years, and I know how my body talks to me. You would have no idea how I do that. So that's part of the plan, you know. Positive intervention at Rites of Passage changes the trajectory for people. The other thing
plan, I love it. Right,
yeah,
awesome plan.
yeah, and the other thing I want to say that's a big clue is that anything to do with women or the feminine that's put down or feared or made a joke of or disappeared is a clue that it holds power.
Mm. Yeah.
So blood, menstrual cycle, childbirth, menopause, you know, like that's always another big clue. But part of, I think, what we have to do, and it's on your blackboard behind you, is trust. Trust. And that could be a scary thing because we've been enculturated, which is just a nice way of saying brainwashed, to not trust our bodies. Our bodies are so unpredictable and you don't know what's going to happen and there's danger at every turn and blah, 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 which is just bullshit and reinforces the medicalization of the menstrual cycle, childbirth, mothering, and menopause. And like you said earlier, like if we need it, we give great thanks. But if we don't, it just messes things up.
Exactly. And of course, menopause is the biggie. I remember reading about that years ago and investigating and looking at the origins of it and how it was just a bunch of hysterical women that the doctors didn't know how to discern what was going on with them. Menopause, men go through similar rites of passage in their own way and they have the same sort of things. And it's crazy how that's been completely bastardized. You'd know well more about that than I do. You said something there, Jane, that I'd like to go back on if that's okay, because these things I can relate to personally in the past as well. That abortion, miscarriage, and I also added stillbirth as birthing rites of passage. I think I'd love to hear your perspective. I'm sure a lot of people listening and women who have had those experiences as well would love to hear what you have to say a bit more about that, please.
Yeah. So part of what makes this make sense is to understand that we have, just like the earth, we have seasons in our lives. So a spring, a summer, an autumn, and a winter. So we have our spring is our maiden season. And so that's from 0, our birth, to about 25. and it's the spring of our lives, and it's cut down, it's dissected in the middle by when our menarche happened. So average age is 13, but whatever that was to you. So childhood is 0 to menarche, and then young woman is from menarche to 25. So whatever happens in the spring of our lives, just like in the garden, whatever happens to the seeds that are planted and how the sprouts are nurtured or not, depends what happens next. Because the next season is the summer of our lives, or the mother season. And everybody goes into the mother season at 25 or so, regardless of if they've had children or even if they ever have children. Because in the summer season of our lives, we are the creatrix. So we conceive, gestate and birth all manner of things besides human babies, like careers, books, projects, gardens, new versions of ourselves. And we need to nurture those things or mother those things. And every birth is a teaching about ourselves and the way of things, and a teaching for what quality you need to bring to mothering or nurturing whatever it is you've born. So this is so important. So the idea here is to do, and this can be homework for everybody, and men can do this too, but obviously giving birth, becoming a father is a very different experience to giving birth, right? As a midlife crisis, for want of a better word, for a man is a completely different experience to menopause. So and puberty is different for boys as it is for girls. So for girls, it's like when the blood's on your undies, that's when the menarche is, but puberty's a much longer process for boys, goes over years and years and years. And the thing to add there is that our culture has forgotten to I just write down every pregnancy results in a birth so I don't forget what I'm talking about, because postmenopausally, it's true, our memories change. But
right, more things to deal with.
yes. It's just you don't have to remember everything anymore.
Oh, good.
But in terms of rites of passage, our culture's forgotten to do them, to honor them, to celebrate them. But actually, whatever happens is the rite of passage. So it doesn't go away, but whatever happens is the rite of passage. And it teaches you how your culture values the next role you're going into, and therefore how to behave. So in the mother season of our lives, the summer of our lives, it's intense, it's hot and it's busy. And so every single thing that we conceive, gestate and birth teaches us the next thing we need to know about ourselves. And every pregnancy results in a birth. So, as I said, abortions or terminations of pregnancies, early pregnancy loss, which is actually the more correct and better name than miscarriage, and late pregnancy losses, like if the baby dies later on in the pregnancy, or stillbirth, if the baby's born dead, and then births in whatever way after that. So, so these experiences are not to be forgotten, not to be overridden, not to be buried. They are part of our becoming. And we need to debrief every pregnancy and birth to ask it, what does this teach me about myself? And then, as I said, the quality you learn about yourself birthing whatever it is, a person or having an early pregnancy loss or a stillbirth or whatever, is the quality you need to bring to mothering or nurturing that. So in particular, if it was an abortion, a termination of pregnancy, then what you learn is the next thing you need to learn about yourself, to look after yourself after that and to take into your next pregnancy. So the hope and the desire is that we learn what we learn and we take it to the next experience, so we don't have to have another experience to teach us the same thing. That's hopefully what we do. And then these things build. So what I want to offer as homework for everybody is that you go through your life chronologically and document in order the pregnancies you've had and what the birth was and what it taught you about yourself. Now, it may not be the actual birthing experience that has the main teaching. It could be the conception. It could be the pregnancy. It could be the postpartum breastfeeding journey. There'll be something in everybody's birth experience that was the big thing. And then what is that quality? Like it could be something that you didn't do. Like, for example, my first birth, as I mentioned earlier, that I had to have the cesarean because I didn't surrender. So what that birth taught me about was about surrender
Mm.
because I didn't do it. So it could be that it teaches you something that you didn't do, if
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then you figure out what it is and try and get it down to, like a couple of words so it makes the most sense. And if you've had babies and then you've birthed a business or a career, like use them in the sequence that they happen.
Mhm.
And then you get this kind of like this formula
Mm.
actually, where you can apply that to whatever you need help with. Like it could be that it's your special formula to use when you feel stuck or you don't know what to do about something. Like, so for example, with my three births, my first teaching was surrender. My next teaching, where I had my daughter 2.5 years later, and I'd figured out about surrender, and I was having a vaginal birth after cesarean at home, and that birth taught me about trust. Because if you're going to have a vaginal birth after cesarean, you have to trust the birth process, absolutely. Because everybody else is terrified your uterus is going to rupture, which
Well, they
is
just say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to facilitate that. Come to hospital, don't they, basically? Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So I learned surrender, then I learned trust, and then in my third birth I learned about presence. Due to what I had to do to get through, I had to bring myself into the present moment, or I knew to do that. So my sequence for if I get into any sort of a pickle or some sort of internalized psychological drama, the first thing I have to do is recognize that I am, which sometimes takes ages. But
Yep.
my step one is surrender.
Yep.
So what that means for me is like stop obsessing about whatever I'm obsessing about. And then my next thing is to trust. So trust the process. And then my next thing is to be present. So to just come back in the present moment. And so like that's my like bring to whatever and work 100% 100% of the time. So everybody will have their own version of that, and that's the gift of the mothering, the gift of the mother season, the gift of our journey through the creatrix. So, and remember, the other key piece is that whatever you learn about yourself in that experience is the quality you need to bring in the mothering or nurturing role. So, for example, if somebody had a big career, and it was a lot of effort and the way what they learned about themselves to get through that, say, I'm just making it up, a university degree, and then setting up their practice or whatever, what they learned was that they had to really apply discipline to do it. Then that birth taught them about discipline. And so what they need to bring to nurture their career is discipline,
Yeah.
for example.
Yeah. It's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely. I mean, duh.
Yeah, no, duh, it's so simple. It's so
not to,
obvious.
not to minimize what you've said and your experience, but
No,
it's just like,
exactly.
again, it's that wisdom of like, it's already in here, just like pulling out the plugs and allowing that to flow. And I'm sure people watching this would be just going, wow, I wish I had. I mean, I know you've helped hundreds of thousands of people all around the world with this work, but I mean, I wish I had have known about you when I was having my child, because it would have made a big difference. Although I did have, a basic of shamanic and yoga support to gift me that beautiful birth. And I want to go back as well, because you mentioned having a natural vaginal birth after a cesarean. Now that's a huge fear, I suppose, for a lot of women, and because that is such a common experience as well. Can you talk a little bit more about that and your experience and what you see, how you talk women through that or prepare them for that? Because I've had a couple of friends do that, and I've walked one of them through it, and she ended up having a beautiful vaginal birth, but she went through hell to get to that mental mindset of, as you say, surrender and trust, of like,
Yeah.
my body's not going to explode, sort of thing.
Yeah, and a lot of people around are frightened of it, and there's all kinds of reasons for that, mainly medico-legal
Mhm.
and misinformation. But the thing about the risk of uterine rupture in a vaginal birth after cesarean is no more than all the other risks that everybody's taking all the time, like for shoulder dystocia or hemorrhage or whatever. Like there can be predisposing factors that you've got to pay attention to, but You know, we've got a caesarean section rate in the public sector that's around 23-25%, and in the private sector is like around 45%. So, you know, of women, like, and a lot of the caesareans are repeat caesareans. So, you know, it's a bit of a setup. So the thing about having a vaginal birth after a caesarean, that's probably the biggest hurdle, is finding somebody who'll go along with you to do it. And the thing is that, like with so many things to do with birth, you got to look around at different practitioners, different hospitals in different countries. And if you see any deviation from a common practice, then it means that everybody's just doing whatever they reckon is the right thing, not what is the right thing. You know, the unfortunate and really sad and actually totally fucked situation about obstetrics is that most of the practices that are done that are not state-of-the-art evidence-based practices. They're just the way it happens around here. And it, you know, there's enough evidence to show that having a vaginal birth after a cesarean in most situations is an absolute safe thing to do. Like, the risks are no more than the other risks, as I said. And the thing for women preparing for this is that, as I say, you will return to the scene of the crime. So what I mean by that is there will be an experience where in the next labour that you'll get to the point where whatever happened last time happened. And so in preparation for a vaginal birth after caesarean, it's really important to like really go into the previous birth that resulted in a caesarean, and where the point where whatever happened that led to that, whether that's you know, so many common maternity care practices lead to more intervention, and more intervention leads to more intervention. It's called the cascade of intervention. And even like having an epidural has a higher caesarean rate than not having an epidural. Things like that. Inductions of labor lead to more likely caesareans, which lead to, epidurals, which lead more likely to caesareans, especially, etc. So if you go in preparation for a vaginal birth after caesarean, you need to figure out what happened at that point when it went in the direction of the caesarean, and what would help next time at that point. Like, what was missing, or what
did you need
went,
in the moment?
yeah, what did you need that wasn't there, and get ready for that. And this doesn't have to be complicated. It's often really simple. You know, it's support or access to a more private space or whatever. Like, the thing is that we kind of imagine birth is this complicated process. It so isn't, you know. Like, birth works, right? Look at the population on the planet.
Yeah.
Like, birth works, right? And we're mammals, and mammals require certain conditions in order to give birth. And if they're not present, then you don't do it. Like, you know, we need to feel private. Like, in other words, not observed. You need to be undisturbed. That means, like, not people fiddling all over you and, are you all right? And when did you wee? And when did you have a drink? And all that kind of thing.
What are you thinking?
Yeah. And we need to primarily feel safe. If we don't feel safe, we're not going to have a baby.
Nothing's
If we
opening
don't
up.
feel safe, we stop. You know, and the way that most women experience that is, say they're labouring at home in preparation for birth, and they go to the hospital and everything stops.
Yeah.
And then it starts again once they've sussed out the environment and they realise there's no, you know, no demons in the cupboard, or no saber-toothed tigers about to come around the corner and all that kind of thing. So basic needs for a mammal to give birth need to be available to all of us. And so in preparation for having a vaginal birth after a caesarean, you've got to make sure that all of those conditions are present, and what was missing last time that you can bring in, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense as well. And I mean, my mum's now 81 and she had 2 Caesars, and that's when they cut them down that way. So at least the Caesars are that little, little scar down below. So in your experience, obviously working with women across the board of all ages, and those women who have had the scars that way, what's the energetics that you've witnessed? Like, how is their story and their wounding and their post-birthing and motherhood experiences different because of the scar tissue? Have you noticed a difference with that? Or
Yeah, well, I think that people who work with meridians and scars on meridians would have better things to say about that than me. But what I would add there, that's called a classical incision, and as opposed to a bikini line or lower segment caesarean section. So what they used to do is actually, it's not really about, in terms of the womb, the scar on the belly, the outside of the skin, isn't necessarily what's on the womb, but your mum, and back, in the day, they used to cut the womb like that as well, which is actually not a very intelligent thing to do, because you're going through so much of the muscle, and that possibly what does lead to more potential drama next time, because more of the muscle has been cut. But the thing about women having caesareans back in the day, they were much more dangerous back in the day than they are now. Like, they've actually got pretty good at caesareans now. It is major abdominal surgery, but they're pretty quick compared to what they used to be like when your mum had caesareans. So, but the thing about women's birth experiences is that whatever they are with us forever, forever. And unless we've worked with them and debriefed them and healed ourselves around them, if that's what's required, then it doesn't go away and it impacts us forever. And the next time it shows up, if not every moment, is at menopause, because everything that has been swept under the carpet or ignored comes out at menopause. And it's like, that sequence that I was talking about then, about all the births and learning the sequence. That's the sequence you need to negotiate peri-menopause. And probably death too, I guess.
when you mentioned, perimenopause and menopause and that whole thing, there's so many original peoples, as you know, practices and philosophies and teachings around those things, and whether it actually really exists, and what the message is about it, and everyone's experience, and the different cultures, and how different women around the world experience those things too. And I remember, I know there's maiden, mother, crone in the triple goddess, but what about the maiden, mother, guardian, crone? Do you work with that? Is that something that you would have heard of that, I'm sure. Is that how you work, or what's the difference between the guardian, crone? Because I feel like I'm going into the guardian phase towards the end, mother to guardian.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So
it's so much fun.
Yeah, hey, the what?
It's so much fun.
Yay. So yes, the triple goddess, maiden, mother, maga, crone. So that's an old story. It comes from the time when we were mothers by the time we were 14, grandmothers by the time we were 35, and dead by the time we were 45 or 50. And then menopause, average age is 50, 51. So if we reached menopause, many women would have died before menopause back in the day. And so if we reached menopause, then we must be close to death. So unfortunately, that particular perspective has hung on in our modern culture, because people think that, once you're post-menopause, then, it's all over. Yeah. And in fact, evolutionary biologists have posed the question, why would a human woman live past her fertility? What is the use of her? Which is a ghastly question. And
for the patriarchy. God.
Yeah, exactly. But what they found out, which is so clever of them, they looked to nature, and which I would always say, nature is our greatest teacher. So that's a very sensible thing to do. And there are 5 creatures on the planet that go through menopause. Oh, wow. Humans, and the other 4 live in the ocean. They're the toothed whales, the pilot whale,
the
orca or killer whale, the beluga whale, and the narwhal, the unicorn of the sea. And all those whales, the post-reproductive grandmother whale, is the leader of the pod. She's the boss. And she, just by her presence, ensures her sons live longer, her daughters live longer, and her grandchildren thrive. So the teaching from nature, which is always the place to go, is that the postmenopausal women need to be the leaders.
Yeah.
So, hello, that's where we're going. And in terms of different cultures, there's a beautiful Native American saying, at menarche, a girl meets her power. Through menstruation, she practices her power, and at menopause, she becomes her power.
Beautiful.
And the traditional Chinese medicine perspective of menopause is it's called the second spring. So that's a lovely way to look at it. And in terms of guardian, the word that I was taught is maga, M-A-G-A. So spring is maiden, mother is summer, and maga or guardian or enchantress or matriarch or grandmother or witch or boss witch. She is the autumn, and then crone is the winter. So the autumn, we know, is all about harvest. So in our maga season,
Oop. I think you've just frozen there. Okay, yeah, so we're talking maga.
yeah, so the maga season is our autumn season. And autumn, as we know, is the season of harvest. And it's actually the time when we see the results of how the spring went. You know, so if we've had a troublesome maidenhood, that follows us through our life, and how we grew or didn't grow. If you think about the metaphor of the vegetation cycle, then the results show up in our margins, in our life. And I have heard that before. That's nice, because that's a beautiful way to look at it. One of the things that happens in around menopause is that everything changes. You know, they don't call it the change of life for nothing, and we can't know who we're going to be in our post-menopause because we've never operated on that cocktail of hormones before, so we don't even know what it's going to feel like. I think one of the most amazing things and awesome and helpful things that I have learned about menopause is from an Aboriginal elder woman called Min Maya that many of your listeners may know. And she called me to her and said, I need to teach you some more things. And so I sat down beside her and asked her questions and wrote as fast as I could. And I said to her, so what about menopause? We're told that at menopause we need to renegotiate a whole lot of things in our lives, you know, our work-life balance, how we eat, what we do in our relationships, our sexuality, etc., and that we need to renegotiate and transform things so that we can do them in a new way. And she said, renegotiation is such a Western way of thinking. She said, I don't know any women, Koori or white, who are ready for the honour of the rite of passage into Mimi. That's what they call the postmenopausal woman. She said, well, everyone's just trying to be a cougar and they're trying to look young and they're not in season. She said, it's not business as usual after menopause. It's a whole new role. The role for the Mimi is to weave the dreams for the grandchildren.
Yeah, beautiful.
So, you know, yeah, so beautiful. However, we are Western or Westernized women, and we do need to renegotiate everything. However, if we understand that it's not going to be business as usual, then everything takes a different, everything has a different meaning and a different invitation.
Yeah.
So the things that change the most after menopause are our sexual relationships and our relationship with our own body and how we eat. Like, I remember one woman who came to the very first menopause Autumn Woman Harvest Queen workshop I did. She said, I get it. I can't live on Vegemite sandwiches and the children's leftovers anymore. which is like absolutely like you need how you care for yourself through perimenopause. So peri means around, sets up your body for your old age. So it's critical that we look after ourselves. And as I mentioned before, which are the quotes from Dr. Christian Northrup, is that menopause is the mother of all wake-up calls. And everything that you've swept under the carpet comes out at menopause, and it's like a labor and a birth. And the birth is the wise woman version of you. And the labor, the perimenopausal journey, can take up to 13 years. It's a big, long, slow process. And some women breeze through it and some don't. And more than anything, our experience of perimenopause is not just about our periods stopping, it's a readout of the status of our adrenal glands and our liver's work, you know? So there's lots of preparation we can do to prepare for it. And she also says, Dr. Christian Northrup, that it's a rite of passage that's designed to heal all the unhealed parts of us. And everything comes up, you know, like 40 to 60% of divorces happen at menopause, initiated by women.
Yeah, well, there you go. And so it's a purification of the blood, isn't it? And it's the bloodlines and the actual physical blood, like with when we're younger and we're starting to menstruate. Now it's the end of that. It still needs to be honored and respected and revered in those ways, which of course Western culture has just gone, we don't need that, and just totally disrespected it. When you were talking before, Jane, about the whales, because I swim with the whales every year in Tonga, and I communicate with them. That's you know, I've been a whale. Anyone listening? I've been a whale before in another lifetime, and a whale midwife, and no, they're my kin most definitely, and they're the elephants of the ocean and the elephants of the whales of the land. And when you were saying that, we're obviously the harpooning and the killing of whales is just horrendous, or any animal, of course, and for hunting purposes like that. But I remember a friend in South Africa telling me years ago that, you know, the elephants are the whales on land, and the matriarchs with this hunting that's been going on, and they're killing the elders of the elephant tribes, then they're leaving all the younger elephants that haven't been taught how to be elephants. And because they're walking the song lines on the earth as the whales are swimming them around the planet. So they're taking all the wisdom and the elder mamas who guide the tribe, or I don't even know, a herd of elephants. And now there's all these young ones that are just completely scattered and left not knowing what to do, and they don't know how to behave because they haven't been taught how to be an actual elephant in their integrity like that. And I remember hearing that and just going, oh my God, it just takes another layer of empathy and compassion and sacred rage of like, how can people do this? The orchestration of that. And then that leads me to, oh, sorry, go on.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say same story with humans, you know, like,
yeah.
You know, if we're not guided by our elders, we don't know what to do. So we just have to make shit up.
Yep, basically. And then look at what's happened in society. And of course, the revival, thank goodness, in the last maybe not even 5-10 years of looking towards our original peoples for guidance, because from my experiences working with them, they're always willing to teach us. We just need to be like, we need to ask, and we need to have the humility to sit there and do the work and show up and be patient and be respectful and ask the right questions and and receive when it's deemed from these elders that we are ready to receive the next level of information. Because as you know very well, when we go, oh, I want to learn all about the original peoples and all these practices and ceremonies and protocols, it's like, no, you've got to earn that right, and you've got to be ready to hold that container of information. And if you're not holding it yourself, then it's not going to come, most definitely. Belinda Jane and I were talking the other week, and she asked me to ask you this question. I was like, great, because I hadn't considered this, about birth songs, thinking of the African traditions, and of course that. Can you speak to that? Because I found that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, so there's a tribe in Africa that the story goes that the mother receives the birth song that's coming, and sometimes even before the conception. And then it becomes like the song for that baby, and they sing it during the birth, and then they use it as a tribe or a community. As an adult deviates from their path and they need calling back, they sing that song again. So that's the way they help somebody who needs to return to their original way of being with this song. So that's the thing about the birth song as a metaphor is whatever the song the mother sings. And in a culture where we've been encouraged to shut up and don't make any noise, and definitely don't make a fuss. So that's the setup from our menarche, and through our menstruation, hide the blood all the time. One of the biggest freeing things that women can do in labor when they're birthing is to actually make sound, and that becomes their literal birth song, which is lovely. And there's a piece in that too, which I'll share, and for birthing women, that whatever's going on for your lips is whatever's going on for your jaw, your pelvis, whatever's going on for your throat is going on for your cervix. So the idea is you need to have relaxed lips and mobile jaw, and make low noises. That helps the birth process.
Wow, I think that's just good in general, because we've all so tied up here and restricted, certainly now, about speaking our truth. I was in the back of the car. I had my little RAV4 when I was in labour, and I was in the back crouching with cushions holding onto the back of the seats. And I don't remember a thing, of course, but my doula said at the time that you sounded like a whale with the noises that I was making. And then when I arrived at the hospital and they had the bath there, and I was like, they said, do you want a bath? And I was like, oh, shit, yeah, of course I do. I just went straight into that. And my dad walked into the room, and he said it just sounded like the most primal, whale, lioness type of sounds. And he had never heard anything like that before, because my sister and my mother didn't make sounds like that. My mum certainly not back in that day. It was all, like the Scientologists, like you're not allowed to make any noise during birth. I mean, how patriarchal and spastic is that? I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable that they actually make women go through that process. So it's that trust in the sounds and the energy, as you said before, the sound healing, the energy that comes through, and the song that comes through, that is going to affect the opening of all of that. And then from there, the surrender and the expansion and the stretching, or whatever you want to call it, happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's such an intimate and intricate experience that we're going to have to do part 2, part 3, part 4, I think, Jane, with this conversation, most definitely, because we're on the hour now, and I've still got like 5,000 questions I want to ask. We'll wrap it up for this time. That's okay. Tell us about the courses and your book. I mean, you've written so many books, and you've got these amazing online and in circles and courses. Can you just fill us in about all that amazing stuff?
Sure. Yes, thank you. So I've written a book. Awesome. It was a birth, of course. A book called 10 Moons, The Inner Journey of Pregnancy. And I've got an e-course, that Pregnancy, The Inner Journey, and I have a one-day workshop called The Shamanic Dimensions of Pregnancy. And so all of those things are different ways of looking at all of that. And I've got preparation for menarche for girls and mothers. So there's a Becoming a Woman, preparation for menstruation for girls. I've got an e-course called Snake Medicine, Shedding Menstrual Shame, and a menopause one-day workshop, and a e-course called Autumn Woman, Harvest Queen. And I have some other books, and you can see them all on my website, janehardwickecollings.com. And I've got a new book that's with the artist at the moment. I'm very excited. It's going to be called Blood Rites, the Spiritual Practice of Menstruation.
Oh, awesome. Sounds great.
Also about to birth an app, which will be, it's called the Spinning Wheels app. So it's about the wisdom of the cycles and the moon and the seasons and your natal lunar phase turn, and a menstrual charting opportunity. So an app coming soon too. So workshops, e-courses and books, and my school, the Women's Mystery School, the School of Shamanic Womancraft, which has 5 different places that it happens within Australia at the moment. And it was happening in the UK, but that's kind of on hold at the moment.
Oh, amazing. Absolutely incredible. And then the line of merchandise, which will be all organic and charity focused and empowering, no doubt, as well. When do you get time to sleep and rest for you?
Well, I go to bed early and I get up early, so I do that. And I'm very energized and motivated by what I'm doing, because I have dedicated my life to the goddess. And so when I say goddess, I mean the earth. So I'm doing whatever I can in every moment to help in that way, so that our great grandchildren have something to inherit that we're proud of.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, loving and light intention legacy, most definitely. And you are an amazing woman, and it's been so wonderful to talk to you. And I really do hope we can do this again, Jane. Your work is just
It would be
incredible.
my pleasure, Denby.
I'd
Thank
love
you.
to.
And good on you for what you're doing, you know, like so wonderful sharing information and down at the cold face, at the grassroots level, helping individuals and stuff. Like, that's where it's at.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, darling. You take care, and we will talk again soon.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.